much going on still. What's up, guys? Still working on the DeLorean. I'm kind of all over the place right now with systems. I had to go back and re-bleed the brakes. Then I've got to put the clutch master cylinder in and bleed that system. I have to remount the rear bumper and fascia and pretty much just double check all of my measurements so I can get my brackets ordered for my accessories. What I plan on doing is running my AC kind of in this area, alternator right here. I want to run them up high. That way it leaves me enough room to put a set of shorty headers and possibly just run the exhaust straight down and out. That's the plan. If it's gonna work, I don't know. Here's all my cooling tubes. Replaced all of the rubber with some silicone hose, just like I did on the Pantera. I swapped out all of the hose clamps with stainless. Got my interior ripped apart because I was doing the shifter and re-gluing some of the leather. And I have to fix my door. This door comes down and it locks and you can't open it from inside the car. I believe I have to take off this whole section here and adjust the lower one maybe to the front lock. I don't know, I'm still reading up on it and I'm gonna play with that. So that's on the list. I've got to fix some wires. I mean, obviously there's one just, I don't know how that got clipped, but there's also bare wire showing over here. So I've got some straightening up and some fixing to do. Well, kind of what started all this mess in here was my shifter cable. So it turns out this cable that runs from the shifter all the way down and originally comes out this tiny hole up here behind the brake line, right here. Well, you can't get a good enough angle to get in this bracket and then come over to where it hooks in. So what I figured out is I need to cut another hole over here. There's these different pages of information that have been posted about doing the swap, and one of the pictures shows a hole in a frame and it says drill a hole for crossgate cable, and that's all it says. Well, I've never done this before. I've never had a transaxle with a crossgate cable, which is essentially a shift cable. If it said drill a hole for the shift cable, okay, I know what that is. I did not know that it was called a crossgate cable, so I assumed it was like for the Porsche application and not necessarily the UN1. So I kind of overlooked that, and well, I got all the way to here, and it turns out you're supposed to drill that hole before you put your engine and transaxle in. I'm going to fish a drill up through there and come at it from the backside, and then somebody makes a cable to replace this one, and it's 3 inches shorter, but it's $300. Well, this car is already nickel and diming me, so I'm going to just drill that hole, move the cable over. I've already rerouted it inside, and I've got a better run, and I'm gonna run it like that. I'm gonna spend that $300 on a new radiator. If you're thinking of doing a swap like this on a DeLorean and you're not very familiar with DeLoreans, don't do it right away. If you want to get into a DeLorean, definitely do that. But spend some time with the car and get to know the car and work on it a little bit and just familiarize yourself with the entire car. And that way, you know, if you go to do this swap, you'll actually understand it better than I do, because I've never worked on a DeLorean. I've never even driven a DeLorean until I got into this project, and I still haven't even driven this car. And that's why, you know, terms like crossgate cable just over my head, because I didn't know. So what I will end up doing along the way with this process is I'm taking notes on all the questions that I've had, and at the end I'll pretty much put together kind of a swap for dummies guide, which will include all the stuff that comes with the kit, you know, the diagrams and things, but there'll be a little bit more of an explanation as to what those things mean. If you've never taken this stuff apart, a lot of this stuff may not make sense, and that's kind of where I was. So hopefully I can put something together like that, and then if somebody in the future wants to do this and you're kind of a DeLorean dummy like me, you'll be able to figure it out a whole lot easier, and you won't have to ask as many questions because, well, hopefully I will have answered most of those questions because my dumb ass asked them all and had to figure them out. I was told that this whole motor had to come back out so I could drill that hole, and that is not the case because I didn't take my motor out. So I just filed everything down. Now I need to paint a little bit just to cover up the bare metal edges. Let me share with you what I've learned so far on this swap if you're thinking about swapping an LS into a DeLorean. To use the kit that I'm using and the kit that's pretty much readily available, you have to find an LS4. They were only in the front wheel drive cars. Mine came from an 06 Impala SS. The reason you're using the LS4 is because the bolt pattern for the bell housing on the back of the engine block is different than any other LS because it was set up for that transmission that goes in a front wheel drive car. Where I live here in the DFW area, LS4s are not like super easy to come by. If you watch one of the earlier videos when I first picked up my motor, you'll see the whole debacle that I had to go through. The engine that I bought had a hole in the piston. Yeah, that's going on the wall of shame. The swap kit, the actual kit itself, which is the adapter, the flywheel, the motor mounts and the bolts and things like that, it's not cheap. I think I paid about 4,500 bucks for it, which is fine. I bought this car with the intention of doing exactly what I'm doing, so I knew ahead of time how expensive it was, and I prepared for that. I think I budgeted somewhere between $16,000 to $20,000 just to do this swap and get the car on the road. That's not including what I paid for the car or doing any of the other repairs to this car. That's pretty much set aside just for this swap, and it adds up very, very quickly. Something else you need to know about doing this swap and the kit. There are quite a few things that are not included with the kit. It's more money, but know this going into it. You're gonna end up sourcing, you gotta change the oil pan. You can't run the stock LS4 oil pan. You have to change to a GTO front sump oil pan. Try tracking one of those down. It's, you know, probably harder than actually finding the LS4. I searched on Craigslist all over the country and finally found a guy out in California that had one, and they're not cheap. You know, the guys that have these oil pans, they know what they've got because they don't reproduce them. So I think I paid probably $350 or so, somewhere in that range, to buy it and to have it shipped out here to Texas. I consider myself lucky for being able to find it, and it was less than 500 bucks. I think one of the DeLorean places has kind of a stockpile, and they want to sell it to you for, I think it's around $1,000. Research this stuff before you get started on a project like this. You're going to need axle boots, you know, these little rubber boots that go on them, and spacers, because what happens is the transaxle is now moved 3 inches backwards. So you need the spacers to get the axles back out to the wheels. So axle boots, you need 4 of those. It's about 175, 180 bucks. The spacers are another $80 to $85. And all of this depends on, you know, where you're getting it from. We talked about the shifter cable. You have to make this modification and reroute that cable to get a better angle at it, a straighter angle. There's an updated cable that somebody's making, which is awesome. It's 300 bucks, 280 plus shipping, so 300 bucks. Again, for me, that money is probably better spent right now on parts like the radiator. Down the road, maybe, we'll see. You're gonna need, you know, miscellaneous hardware here and there. There are some pieces of hardware that are not included that you have to source. Thankfully, I have an Ace Hardware not too far from me, and they have pretty much all the metric stuff that I've needed so far, so I got lucky. You'll need the LS top plate, that covers over the DOD. You're gonna delete that. You're gonna plug it all up and put a solid plate across there, and then you've gotta tap that for your oil sender. So those are other things that you're gonna have to purchase, you know, the fittings for that and the sending unit for that. You have to change your front cover on the engine. And if you stick with the LS4 style water pump and some of the accessories, you can use the piece that comes in the kit that will actually relocate your cam sensor over just a little bit. I have that on my motor right now. Because I'm changing mine up, I don't want to run the LS4 style water pump and that housing, and I want something a little bit nicer. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of it, but you will when you walk. I mean, think about it. An LS and a DeLorean, who's not going to want to walk up and see that? So I want my motor to look, I don't know, more like a hot rod. It's personal preference. This is the way I want to go with mine. I went ahead and changed the rear cover as well because it was actually just easier than replacing the seal itself. You know, just bolt the cover on. So you get the motor mounts, the actual steel pieces, but you need to buy the actual mounts that go to the block that will sit in the steel motor mount. So the urethane motor mounts are about $65. You'll need a specific starter. It's a mini starter. That starter is $257. The clutch pressure plate is a custom deal. There's one guy that makes it. You have to call him and tell him what you're doing. That's $275. The DeLorean clutch disc on eBay is $142. I chose to buy the alignment tool, which was another $20. I also did the transmission coupler pins while my transaxle was out. Basically, they go in and they pin some things in there, and just there's a coupler that makes that shaft a little bit stronger so it can handle more power. That kit itself was $263 plus the labor to have somebody do it for you. Luckily for me, I have somebody that I trust up in Denton, ATS Racing. Aaron and Rob do great work, so I was happy to get it up to them, and I trust those guys. Adding up all these other parts that I just went over, you're going to be about $2,100, $2,200, depending again on where you get them from. Factor in the cost of rebuilding that LS4 that you're going to pick up. You're probably going to want to do a full rebuild on it. I haven't even done anything crazy with mine. I just upgraded my cam and springs. To be safe, you're going to be $6,000 to $7,000 in a motor rebuild. And that's having the machine work done and then assembling it yourself. You will need to cut and grind on your engine block. You're going to have to grind down this little tab on the side where the starter is going to bolt onto the adapter plate because it will interfere. Not a big deal. I did it with a Dremel tool, but do it before you start tearing down that motor to do a rebuild. Don't do what I did and rebuild your entire engine, have a fresh motor sitting there that you have to completely cover and protect from all these little aluminum shavings. The bell housing for the transaxle also needs to be cut on, and you have to grind on it to get it to clear the pressure plate and where the starter kicks in. That was in my last video. I just covered that on how to do that. Again, there's no instructions on exactly how to do it. In my last video, I covered how I did it, and I think it came out pretty well. I'm very happy with the results. The other things that you're gonna run into, the manifold. So everyone is saying run an LS1 or an LS6 manifold. Well, you can use the LS4 manifold. It's restricted in the flow. That's why they say don't use it. It's not that it won't bolt up or work, it's just not gonna give you that power that the other ones will. So depending on how you're building your car, and if you're building it on a budget, then use it. But everyone says you have to turn it around and it has to face the firewall, and then you run this adapter, and then you run your cold air tube round and back. And I don't want to do that either. I'm going to attempt to run a truck manifold so it sits up a little bit higher. And then I'm actually going to cut into the back where that fiberglass piece is that bolts into the back, and I'm going to make some modifications and refiberglass, do whatever I need to do to create that room to come out and find another spot for that air intake. I don't want to flip my manifold backwards. One of the first things that you'll want to do, and you'll probably figure this out when you go to take the original engine out, you're going to want to cut that back brace off the far rear of the car. When you take that bumper section off, that brace that runs across, get it out of the way. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier removing that old engine and putting the new one in. There's a file out there that will give you dimensions and everything. You can actually make your own with a little bracket on each end that will bolt back into the chassis. And that's what I'm going to end up doing. Either modifying the one that I have or creating a new one that goes in and just bolts in. The oil pan for the GTO that you spent so much money on, be prepared to cut part of that out. I did it, and then I was told afterwards that because I'm using the UN1, I didn't necessarily have to do it, but I'm glad that I did. Because if I'd have left it, I would have been fighting that engine install a lot more than what we did. You know, as far as putting an engine in a car, this was probably the simplest one next to like a Volkswagen. This one went pretty quick and pretty easy. I didn't have one of those levelers where I could really tilt that thing like this. So, you know, I worked with what I had and we made it work. It went in like an hour and a half, maybe a little less. And we still had some stuff that we ran up against that we had to correct first. Don't take this as a video that is discouraging you from attempting to do this. That's not what this is, because this is a super cool swap and I hope to see a ton more. I can't wait to finish this thing. I just want other people to understand that you're not just going to buy a DeLorean. Oh, I'll buy an LS4 and I'm going to buy a kit and I'm going to slap it together and I'm going to stick it in the car. No, you ain't. You're going to spend, $15,000, $20,000 extra to do this. And that's assuming you have a car that is in good condition. I've gone through the brake system. I'm doing cooling. I'm touching every system basically on this car because mine sat for like 38 years in a garage. So everything's trashed and I got to get it up to snuff and make it safe. If this is something you truly want to do and you're passionate about getting a DeLorean and doing this swap, set aside $20,000. Just earmark that money for this swap. That way, if you come up against something unexpected, you're not going to be shocked. And you know what? You might even have some money left over in the end. It depends on how much of the work you're doing yourself and how much you're farming out to somebody. Last thing I'll say is, in doing a swap like this, start with a good car. If you can find one that is well sorted, and by that I mean brake system, cooling system, fuel system, steering, suspension, things like that. Those are the things I've come across on this car that are really nickel and diming me. It's like no matter what I touch, I have to redo it. So it gets frustrating. I touched on this once before. There is no how-to manual. This isn't like building an AC Cobra. That's been done thousands of times. You can call up any one of these companies. They'll deliver a body and a chassis and they'll give you a book. And you can literally just go through it step by step. Here's what you need to do all the way through until you're on the road. You can't do that with this. I ask a lot of questions because I don't know dick about this car. I don't have a manual for this car. This is my first time ever messing with one. So, things like not knowing what a crossgate cable is. I bet there's a ton of you out there that know what that is, but I don't. So, that caused me to be in the position that I'm in now. There were some things I came up against that were not specific to my swap because I'm using the UN1, and they were for the Porsche transaxle swap. So it didn't apply to me. I guess I kind of figured this was just one of them. It is what it is. It's a moot point now. I got my hole drilled. I'm going to keep plugging away on this project. So I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel in any way. I just want to take all of the information, and there's a ton of it out there for this swap. The guy that came up with this kit is just a wealth of knowledge. Pretty much anything that could come up, he's probably tackled it. And he's got all these diagrams and these drawings and spreadsheets and stuff like that. It's really just taking all of that information and kind of just making it make sense to dummies like me. The cool part about doing this project is being in a lot of the Facebook groups with the DeLoreans and stuff. There's so many people in these groups and they're very, very knowledgeable. There are other groups out there that are just horrible to be a part of. Corvette, excuse me. At the end of the day, when I finish this project, is just say, hey, these are the struggles that I had. This is what I didn't understand. Here it is explained, maybe in a little bit simpler way. And if you want to do something like this, then follow along in these videos, because I promise you this is not the last thing that I'm going to screw up or miss. And that way you don't fall into the same situation. Thanks so much for watching. Stay hungry, stay foolish.